For more on that and so much more, I want to bring in Mark Krikorian, the Executive Director for the Center for Immigration Studies, who joins us now. Mark, good to have you back with us, sir.
Glad to be here.
So things are not slowing down on the border, although the Biden administration has pretended they are, at least.
Well, they did go down from December to January, and although they did the same thing last year. The administration kind of was declaring mission accomplished. What they did is, one of the things they did is got the Mexican army to try to disrupt some of this smuggling, and they benefited from Governor Abbott in Texas.
Yeah.
Disputing people. No, the answer is this is not going away. They're hoping they can try to get Mexico and other countries to do their job for them, but it's our border and we need to enforce it. And these guys are just unwilling to do what's necessary to stop illegal immigration.
The head of the Border Patrol, Raul Ortiz, just spoke with 60 Minutes over the weekend, and he had this to say. He's like, I've never actually met with Joe Biden.
I've never had one conversation with the president or the vice president for that matter. And so I was the chief of the Border Patrol. I commanded 21,000 people. That's a problem.
I mean, that is a problem. He's right about that. And it definitely demonstrates that they have no interest in solving this, do they?
No, not at all. I mean, they just don't consider it that important. If anything, the people in the administration, especially the sort of younger folks who do a lot of the work, they probably think the Border Patrol is some kind of fascistic whatever it is, and they wouldn't want the president or vice president to meet with them. But, you got to wonder, this is just political malpractice. Whatever you think about policy, the idea that, Mrs. Borderzar, the vice president, or President Biden wouldn't even once have had a photo op with the head of the Border Patrol, even considering this is their biggest vulnerability. It's almost inexplicable until you realize that these guys, that this administration, the people running immigration, think that immigration enforcement is just wrong. This is just part of the, defund the police kind of perspective, and they're not defunding the Border Patrol, but frankly, they would like to, and they're certainly not going to spend any time talking to the head of the Border Patrol.
Yeah, well, in fact, it's so bewildering to even places like CNN. They were asking Alejandro Mayorkas this weekend whether this is some sort of big electoral policy, like they're just bringing in voters to change the elections in the United States. Here's that exchange.
Is it the policy of the Biden administration to allow as many migrants to come across the border in order to change the political dynamics, the electoral dynamics of America?
Of course not. And the facts indicate that that is absolutely false. Since May of this year, of last year, we have removed or returned more individuals than in any year since 2015, and we haven't even run 12 months.
What do the facts tell you, Mark Krikorian?
Well, I actually don't think that this administration is driven by an agenda of importing voters. I actually don't think that's what this is about. They're, way down the line when some of these people end up becoming voters, sure, they're happy to have that. I'm not saying that they're against it. I just don't think that's what's driving this. What's driving this, and whether it's Mayorkas's views or anyone else in the administration, is ideological. They don't believe the American people have the right to keep anybody out. They think immigration law is Jim Crow. And I don't mean like Jim Crow. They think it actually is Jim Crow. And so they're fine with subverting the immigration law. They don't think it is morally defensible. And that's actually worse, in my perspective, than it was some kind of cynical plot to import voters.
Yeah.
Because how do you argue against that? That's an unbridgeable gulf. They think immigration limits are immoral. And I think the political discussion should force them to openly say that so voters can understand what's at stake here.
Well, to the point that they will not acknowledge in any meaningful or detailed sense the horrors that have been visited upon the American people as a result of this border. So they don't talk in detail about the fentanyl and all of the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are dying. They don't talk about the destruction the cartels have wrought. They don't talk about the deaths at the border. They don't talk about Lake and Riley. Alejandro Mayorkas refused to even say her name this weekend on CBS when he was asked about her. He said that it was a tragedy and that our hearts are with, quote, the family. But that's it. They don't want to talk about the downsides here.
No, certainly not. And, look, there's a lot of illegal aliens, and some of them are going to be criminals. And sometimes, the government may not have a responsibility there. But this poor woman's murderer was actually in custody and then let go into the country and then protected by sanctuary policies. Those government policies, both at the federal and the local level, are responsible for this woman's death. This isn't some indirect thing. Well, the government should have done a better job at the border and this guy snuck by. Well, okay, the government would bear some responsibility for somebody like that who committed a crime. But this is way more direct connection. This guy was in their hands. They decided to let him go. And sorry, but that means that some of the blood of Ms. Riley is on the hands of this administration.
Yes, unquestionably so. And, to go back to your point before that they think that we have some sort of moral obligation to allow the masses of the world to come into the United States, they clearly don't trust the American public with that judgment because they keep the details of the way they're importing foreign nationals a secret. In fact, the Center for Immigration Studies, your organization, has just released some new information on the secret flights that the Biden administration is orchestrating to bring foreign nationals all across our country. What have you learned?
There's some people may be familiar with that CBP-1 app. There's been a lot of talk about that. It helps illegal aliens schedule their illegal immigration. Well, there's another aspect to that where people use that app to fly over the border directly to interior U.S. airports from 9 countries. They have the administration has started this parole program, which is all illegal, where people who have no right to come here are simply waved into the United States by this administration. Last year, about 1/3 of a million people, 320,000 people, were flown directly to U.S. airports. And so we asked, with the Freedom of Information Act request, what airports do they go to? How many people went to each airport? They won't tell us. It's still in litigation, but they won't tell us. And the reason they gave was that there are so many people going to these airports that it overwhelms them. They're not using these words, but this is what they're saying.
Yes.
It overwhelms their ability to securely run these airports. In other words, it is a security threat to tell us which airports these people are going to for this program that they themselves have created. So the Biden administration's parole program to fly illegal immigrants into the United States is creating a security threat, so they can't tell us where they're going.
Now, again, if this is some sort of moral good that we should be doing this because it's the right thing to do, why are they being so secretive about the operations?
Well, one assumes, there's 2 possibilities. One is the administration is exaggerating the security threat in order not to release politically harmful information. The other option is that they're telling the truth, and the Biden administration's own policies are creating security vulnerabilities within the United States. Neither one of those is particularly good, but it's all driven by the idea that we have an obligation to let in anyone who wants to come here. And I'm sorry, but that's what needs to be the basis of debate over immigration, not just the symptoms, like the murder of Lake and Riley and things like those are all important. But what you need to get Democratic politicians on the record to say is, do you believe there should be limits to immigration? And if so, what are you willing to do to actually enforce those limits? And they're just not willing to enforce immigration limits. They don't think it's the right thing to do.
No, by the way, I do see that I've got somebody on hold right now who has a very good question. Or at least learn something. I'm gonna preempt Daryl's question for a moment. Daryl, hold tight. I want to take your call in a moment, but I do want to ask Mark Krikorian about this. I've seen a couple times that selective service, our selective service system here in the United States,
right,
where you can sign up to be drafted if necessary into combat, requires that they say undocumented immigrants register. That is according to the federal government. Do you know off the top of your head, Mark Krikorian, whether or not all of these military-aged males who are crossing our border are signing up for selective service?
I have no idea, but Really? Do you think they're doing that? No, of course
I doubt it. But
not.
aren't they
Yeah, of
obligated,
course.
though?
They're legally obliged. It is a criminal offense not to sign up for the draft. Now, there is no draft, but for some potential future draft, yeah, absolutely. And are they not doing it? Of course not. And that's just one of the many laws that supposedly law-abiding illegal aliens are not complying with. That storyline. They're all law-abiding other than violating criminal, immigration law. Well, that's not true, because they're engaging in identity theft, Social Security fraud, all kinds of stuff, as well as not complying with the requirement to register for selective service.
It's also fascinating. Well, thank you for following the details so assiduously. I really appreciate it. It's always so helpful. Mark Krikorian from the Center for Immigration Studies. Thank you, sir.